knowing that I'm looking to save to build a better life for him, that impulse of that sell point is now just completely gone. Like, that was probably a 2-year horizon for me on the current trajectory of Bitcoin, but now I'm like, no, let's hold off. I can wait to 2030 now. My liquid net worth is all in Bitcoin right now. I carry as little fiat as humanly possible. What I see as one of the great use cases for this book and these principles is it can be the principles by which you program AI to use in order to build things for us, to ensure that in a similar way that Bitcoin protects us from ourselves and our own money, that early in the adoption cycle where that is actually really important, especially to get mainstream retail on board. And so to anyone listening to this that might be thinking, should I come on and talk to Robin, even though I'm saying effectively the same thing, you'll say it and it'll be 2% different to someone or 5% different to someone, and it will be the reason for someone being orange pilled.
Hi Arv, how are you doing? Everything fine on your end?
It is doing incredibly well. I'm incredibly tired, but incredibly well.
And a newborn father.
Well, I'm a newborn father with a newborn child as well. And it's been an interesting 6 months, let's put it that way. Yeah. I don't know if the cameras can pick it up, but I think they can. You can sort of see the bags forming from 6 months of a lack of sleep, of baby waking up 5 times a night. It's not good for productivity, but the best thing that's ever happened to me.
I don't know how longevity people look at babies actually, because sleep is such an important pillar.
Well, I hear it's short term, but we'll give them a couple more years and see whether or not the sleep gets better, which hopefully it will. But I will say short term lack of sleep is probably not going to kill me, but long term happiness of having a child is probably going to make me want to live longer. It gives you an actual reason to want to be on this earth rather than just, hey, let's go on a holiday, or, I want to buy this thing, or, hey, let's just make a whole bunch of money. Purpose is important. And since having him, it's been interesting to see how, like, even my perspectives have started to shift to my work, to the way that I live my life, the things that I think about. It's been really interesting.
Has it changed your perspective on Bitcoin, because you have been before the kid already quite deep in the rabbit hole?
I don't think it's changed my perspective on Bitcoin, because largely what Bitcoin was doing around being able to store my time effectively for the next generation, for the work that I do now, I already knew that as a long-term goal or principle. And so now being able to pass it on to my son and hopefully his children to the future, that was always in the back of my mind as one of those things. What I will say is the reason why I want to store my energy over time has now really shifted. Because before you have a kid, you think about, yes, I want to set up my kids for financially, and I want to be a great father. But the moment you actually hold the child and you start thinking about their development, their future, who they could be, the drive to want to do that becomes so much greater. And so now I'm probably more driven to hold and stack for longer. And as an example as to where this shift happened, I had a part exit strategy on my current stack to get me to financial freedom. Because pre having him, I was always thinking about, hey, I want to be financially free to do the things in life that I want to do. Like, I don't want to be stuck in my 9-to-5 job. I want to do my Bitcoin research. I want to travel the world. I want to experience. I want to live life to the fullest. That's still a goal, absolutely. And I had a price point of when I would liquidate part of my stack in order to wipe out all my fiat debts, which are the home that I'm in right now has got a home loan against it and some other commitments that I've got financially. But now, knowing that I'm looking to save to build a better life for him, that impulse of that sell point is now just completely gone. Like, that was probably a 2-year horizon for me on the current trajectory of Bitcoin, but now I'm like, no, let's hold off. I can wait to 2030 now. I can sacrifice a little bit longer in my day job to get that stack even higher in order to set him up even better, because all the things I want him to experience in life, I need to now wait longer. And I have zero near zero desire for my own personal wants in this life now, and I've got huge desire to make sure that I'm doing the best thing for him, which is actually extending my time horizon on when I'd start to access or draw down from that stack. So from that perspective, it's absolutely changed.
I forgot with whom I talked to last week about it, that very exact topic, that kids brought the actual low time preference in his life, where he was aware of the low time preference before, but with kids, he really truly understood low time preference. And I think that's the similar for you, because I would imagine you had before already a low time preference, but a kid makes it just so much more real. And I cannot really talk about it as I don't have a kid, but I can only talk about what all the people who get kids and are newborn fathers tell me. And it's funny enough, the same story. It's like this with low time preference and wanting to provide and having something that will outlive yourself and having to provide and wanting to provide something for this newborn baby. It's something that I hear from like literally every one of them. I mean, they're all Bitcoiners, so
Yeah.
it's a small biased group, but I should interview some outside Bitcoiners on that topic. It would be fun to talk about that. But yeah, that's really interesting to see. But before we get deep in all the topics, maybe give the viewers and the listeners some background of who you are and especially why you're excited about Bitcoin.
Yeah, cool. So my name is Arvind. I've been on the show before, maybe about a year ago now, and so I'll say go back and watch that for some of the TLDR on who I am in a bit more detail. But in essence, I'm based out of Melbourne, Australia. Really entered the space in about 2020 as we got locked down in the pandemic. Melbourne, most locked down city in the world. That totalitarian approach to government overreach, I'll call it, effectively started my journey to where I went full on deep into Bitcoin across 2020 to 2022. I did my 1,000 hours over that sort of 1.5, 2 year period, every podcast, every major book. I went deep to the point where I was 100% committed to this as both a technology asset, but also as almost like a philosophy to the way in which we should be structuring our society and life more broadly. So by 2022, I was all in. It was game over. My liquid net worth is all in Bitcoin right now. I carry as little fiat as humanly possible, but that's obviously tempered with real estate holdings and superannuation, which is also part Bitcoin for me here in Australia. And superannuation is like our retirement savings here in Australia. So that's like the background as to how I got into Bitcoin. But then I'd say around 2022, 2023, I started to realize, hey, there's something else about Bitcoin that I can't quite put my finger on. It felt like I was missing something, and there was something bigger than what I was seeing around it as a financial asset, store of value, medium of exchange, etc. And that's what led me to an initial theory that I came up with, I want to say about 1.5 years ago, which was Bitcoin wasn't solving for money. Bitcoin was solving for human behavior in money. And I started to realize that all of the technical elements that made Bitcoin successful were ultimately trying to mitigate adverse human behaviors that were working against the intent of the monetary system that they were using, that ultimately led to all of the failures that we've seen through time. And Bitcoin returning to a hard money was the modern equivalent of gold for the digital era, controlling for a lot of this and acting as a far better form of money than gold, because it was tackling more of these human behaviors than gold ever could. And so I went down this is like my second rabbit hole. It was almost like a version 2.0 trying to go down that rabbit hole. And when we spoke about 1 year ago, I'd come up with the idea. I thought I'd landed it, and I was about to start building content off it and trying to make that my unique contribution to the Bitcoin space, because I'd done the hours, I'd figured it out. I thought I had something unique, and I thought, well, this could be my exit out of the fiat 9-to-5 system, really start to contribute meaningfully into the Bitcoin ecosystem on its adoption journey. And so I started, going on the podcast trails, yourself, Bram Kanston, the boys at Stack Finance, and a few others as well. But I quickly realized that my approach to it was very surface level. And I personally hate it when people are headline readers, are headline repeaters that don't go into the detail but just think they know something when they haven't done the work. And I actually got a big dose of you haven't done the work when I was going through this initial journey of raising the idea, because the amount of conversations I had where even I couldn't justify it succinctly and get people to believe it showed that I hadn't created or done the research in order to provide the justification for my theory that it's solving for human behavior. And so after my little stint on a 3-month podcast and building content, I said, hey, let's pause. I'm not going to get to the bottom of this by building content to try and make money. I need to just stop that and now go eyeballs deep into research and come out the other side with something that is robust and something well tested that truly proves my point, and then from there start to build from it. And ultimately, that's where we are now. I'm about 4 or 5 months into that deep research journey, where I'll be ending it with a book hopefully being published some point late next year. And right now, eyeballs deep into academic level research into multiple areas to justify it. So that's sort of the journey and progression into where I am right now.
That's amazing. And so late next year, so like it will be published in like about a year then.
Yeah, I'm hoping so, and that's probably ambitious because this is the first book that I've written. I've written long form content, but not a book. I've done research before as a PhD candidate. I never completed that PhD, but as a PhD candidate, I had conducted research, so that part's a bit on the easy side. And using trusty Grok and Gemini to help build a project plan for writing a book and having it help structure the approach, it's saying that, yeah, by September, you would have a fully edited, ready to publish book ready to go. Whether or not I run into writer's block or some of these other things that I've heard about, that might delay it a little bit, but I'm going to try and hold myself accountable to get to that September timeframe of having it published on the shelves ready to go.
Awesome. You can launch it on my next birthday in September.
Very well. I'll send you a signed copy if it's published for your birthday. How about that?
It's of September.
Nice. All right, let me write that down.
But this is amazing. I think you and there's so many. I mean, it's difficult for me because like I did not do any really deep research when I started the podcast. Like of course, I understood Bitcoin, but I got to know with the podcast how little actually I understand Bitcoin, how small my knowledge on Bitcoin was. It was very surface level. I was already all in Bitcoin. I was self-custodial from the day one, but I realized how much deeper I had to go to fully grasp the potential and the different angles and perspectives on Bitcoin. And even today, like there's always some guest that brings something and I'm like, what? I did not know about that. And this is just an amazing journey for me. So, I'm maybe took an opposite path where I just learned with my audience. But I really appreciate how you do it with a super deep research. And I thought like you have very interesting thoughts and theories already that like a year ago when we recorded. And so I'm now super excited that you took like 5-6 months even deeper on that and see what you kind of came up with. And we've talked about before you had like some 5-part structure for your theory and for your book. So yeah, I think maybe we can start a little bit with the theory and then go through those parts, because as you told me right before we started, I was like, that's really interesting and maybe something actually unique, because I think a lot of Bitcoin content is kind of patterns from other Bitcoin content already. So it feels like something truly unique what you have.
But I will say for that, that repeatability across the content, I still think it's valuable as well, and I think you probably agree, which is sometimes it just takes articulating the same thing in a slightly different way that gets that one person orange pilled. And I think we're that early in the adoption cycle where that is actually really, really important, especially to get mainstream retail on board. And so, to anyone listening to this that might be thinking, oh, should I come on and talk to Robin, even though I'm saying effectively the same thing? You'll say it and it'll be 2% different to someone or 5% different to someone. And it will be the reason for someone being orange pilled because they heard it in the way that they needed to hear it. So I still think that that's incredibly valuable. But to the book, so the 5 parts, I call it part 0. And I didn't tell you this before we started recording, but part 0 will be the hypothesis. So I'll give a bit of backstory to give the reader context as to how I came to this initial hypothesis, which was Bitcoin doesn't solve for money, it solves for human behavior, and go through the purpose and outline the book. So that's like sort of scene setting, a preface, but I call it part 0. Part 1 will be the framing. Framing has taken me the longest to land. And what I mean by framing is, what is the worldview that I am taking on this research that is unique, that gets me to my outcome? And I'll go into detail because that's where I had my sort of epiphany in the last sort of 2 to 3 weeks that I think will be interesting for a lot of people to hear. From there, we go with that framing. We do a retelling in part 2 of this book on the history of money. And because the history of money, you cannot know where you're going unless you know where you've been. I'm a huge believer in history is our best teacher. But the way that history has been told doesn't have all the answers that I need personally to prove my theory. And so I need to do a retelling of the history of money through this new framing that I've developed. Part 3 then looks at evolutionary psychology. And the reason behind this is a lot of the behaviors that we're trying to control in order to make Bitcoin successful, i.e. these 7 deadly sins, which is the framework that I use, I believed was rooted in our DNA, i.e. we were evolved to have certain behaviors for survival well before we became, I wouldn't call enlightened, but intelligent, an intelligent species as we are today. And these behaviors persist in our more primitive brain and biology. And so going down that and being able to show why this is being caused was important to me. So we'll go into evolutionary psychology. Then part 4 looks at religious wisdoms. My framework for defining these behaviors has always been around the 7 deadly sins. And we've always seen how religion has been able to put in place doctrine or belief systems that are able to counteract these adverse behaviors in the 7 deadly sins. And so I'll go down the rabbit hole on these religious frameworks and how they use their various control mechanisms in order to prevent these adverse behaviors from manifesting themselves in the communities of these religious groups, which then leads us into part 5, the Bitcoin solution. So the journey that we've taken on is we've seen the history of money and how behaviors are manifested. We understand where these behaviors manifested from in the form of evolutionary biology. We then see where other systems have been able to help control and prevent these behaviors from manifesting in order to ensure our long-term survival and prosperity. And then finally, drawing on all of that as a foundation, we can draw parallels to what's happening in Bitcoin specifically to prove that Bitcoin solves for human behavior, not money. And then that then creates the justification for part 6, which is the Bitcoin solution framework, which is how can we take everything that I've just talked through, Bitcoin as the incredible use case that we all now know and love, and apply these same principles to any other parts of our civilization. That could be, thinking about it now in a modern context, AI, but specifically, we're seeing AI agents getting popping up all over the place. They're programming, they're building for us. But what are the principles that they're using in order to build the solutions for humanity moving forward. And right now they're quite basic in nature, but eventually they're going to get more complex. They're going to be building things across our education systems, our food production, our energy systems, you name it. An AI agent or AI in some way, shape, or form is going to build our stuff. It is ultimately, and we're starting to see biases already come into AI from your Googles versus your Groks. You can tell that there are biases depending on how it's been programmed. What I see as one of the great use cases for this book and these principles is it can be the principles by which you program AI to use in order to build things for us, to ensure that in a similar way that Bitcoin protects us from ourselves and our own money. Pick your industry, pick your problem to solve. These principles could be applied in some way, shape, or form. And I haven't even thought of all the ways that it could be. But obviously the focus now is let's do the work to justify the position. And then I think with that justification, especially because it's going to be rooted in academic research, will provide more justification and rigor so that mainstream institutions, the academic community as well, might be able to use this as a starting point for more in-depth research. Because when you look at me, I'm doing this part-time. Yes, I'm accessing academic literature in order to justify my points, and we can go through how I'm doing that as well. I'm not a researcher in the same way that an academic is, and so I don't want to take away from the hard work that they do. But what I'm hoping that this does is inspire someone in academia to realize actually there's something here that can be pursued. And I've already found a whole bunch of research gaps and help build a better foundation for Bitcoin in academia. Because ultimately, when all that starts to get published, it can be used as justification for more traditional areas of our civilization to start to adopt as well. So it's almost like a two-prong. We can apply in the real world, but as well, we can kickstart academia.
Academia is really interesting because, and I just posted this right now, so I wanted to quickly show it to you. Because I do think it is a field of traditional economic professors, of traditional economic people, TradFi. It's kind of hard to reach them with Bitcoin, and it's sad to see. And we have this like 2018 brought Harvard something out that it's more likely for Bitcoin to hit like $100 than 100K. Now, obviously, we hit the 100K, and in 2025, Harvard actually bought the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF and put like 116 million in, and funny enough, right above the 100,000, and really interesting. I did not know about that. Grafton told me about that in a meme. There's a Harvard professor that I think he's the guy that actually wrote this with the 100 to 100K, and he's a professor for economics in the Harvard University, international grand master of chess, and he wrote a book on the dollar, obviously. And he says he basically did not anticipate that this thing that is worthless just gets to the size that it is. So he still does not really see it, even though he has been proven very wrong over the past years. And it really is alarming for me when a professor of economics who wrote something of like, hey, Bitcoin is more likely to go to $100 than 100K, at the point where it reaches 100K, at the point where his employer is buying Bitcoin, is buying the very thing he's against, that he's still saying like, oh no, like it still doesn't do anything. It's bad.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of struggled by those like not openness by professors of economics.
And to be honest, I think that, and this is not to paint a broad brush across all professors, and professor being an indicator of a very long tenure on their current research path or their academic path. And like you're probably 10, 15, 20 years down that rabbit hole. You've built a belief system, and to break that belief system, to have the humility to say, actually, I've been wrong. The last 20 years of my career have been founded in something that was useless. maybe not useless, but not as worthwhile as what I would have thought. That's a very hard step for most people to take. But where I think something like what I'm doing hopefully will do is inspire the next generation of academics. Because to the point at the very start when we started talking about time preference, I think a lot of the things that we do today are hoping for an outcome in 3 years, in 5 years, in 8 years, in 10 years. But the reality is, if we are to do this sustainably, our actions today may not take root for 30 years, 50 years, but it has to start somewhere and you have to build toward it. And even if you look at just this fiat system that we're currently in, Nixon took us off the gold standard in 71. I think it was 71, and we're in 2025, and it's now really starting to blow itself up. And even then, it may not blow up for quite a bit longer. So we're talking about a 55-year period for the fiat system to get to this point. That's a long time, right? It's been working relatively well all through the 90s, or well enough that no one's really had to care about it too much. It's only really hit the tipping point some point, even after Bitcoin's introduction, so late 2010s, early 2020s, that we're really starting to see this tipping point, people realizing it took 50 years. And that, by historical standards, is still super fast. Other monetary systems have taken 400, 500 years to reach these tipping points. We're talking about 50 years here. And then we're wanting right now to do things in 3 and 5 and 10 years. And so our time preference is so skewed because of the world that we live in today, which is we want everything now, it's on demand. And so we've got this ingrained belief system that everything can be done so quickly. But by making that sacrifice, we will never build sustainable long-term solutions. And so new academics and 20 years will be where these professors are. And in that 20 years time, they will really start to accelerate the space. But you have to start that journey now for us to get that benefit in 20 to 30 years.
Which makes me kind of wonder of like how long this whole Bitcoin thing will take, because we have come such a long way, and I'm surprised how far we already are. Like I kind of expected it to go a little slower, honestly, with BlackRock, with Donald Trump being at Bitcoin conferences and all those. Like this is for the president of the United States, even to be at a conference, at a Bitcoin conference, it has to be so important that he sees there's a huge amount of voter power and also buying power for like his donations and all of that, that he actually just considers to go there. Because he can be, especially in those busy days before the election, he can be at like 5,000 different events. And he chose the Bitcoin thing. So all those things came for me too early, not too early, but like very early.
It was very quick, but as quickly as it came, it can quickly leave. And you just see the contrast between Biden and Trump. Only 4 years ago, we were under Bidenomics, heading into wars left, right, and center. And then a couple of years later, now we've got the Trump era, which is the complete opposite. Who's to say that in 2028 or whenever the next elections are in the US, someone else comes in who is completely different again, that may not be as sympathetic to the Bitcoin cause, because maybe it doesn't carry as much weight as it did in the last election when Trump was truly trying to go grassroots everywhere with an established Republican base now within the US. Do they need to do it again? And so I'm always a pessimistic optimist. I'm pessimistic in order to try and find all my blind spots, but optimistic about where we can go, because I don't think that blind trust will ever get us anywhere. And so I'm pessimistically optimistic about where we end up in 2028, 2030, 2032 with a potential change in government, or at least a change in leadership at the head of the Republican Party. And this is just one aspect. We actually don't know how it's going to play out in and amongst the EU nations, the African nations, and BRICS. How does this form as part of this new coalition that's being built under BRICS and their monetary system? Does Bitcoin play a role? Do they even need Bitcoin? And so the chessboard is still playing itself out. It's still in the early days, and someone can pull out an incredible move on this board that completely derails or at least pauses the Bitcoin trajectory. And this will just be seen as a momentary blimp on the price charts or the adoption charts, and we go through a malaise or a stagnation for a bit. So I'm open to great blimp, but as quickly as it comes, it can quickly go.
And this is so interesting because you tie it to human behavior, and I think human behavior is the one thing that is really interesting in Bitcoin. When we see the behavior of non-coiners, of the behavior of Bitcoiners, and the whole game theory around that, why someone actually buys Bitcoin, why does someone pay attention to Bitcoin, why do other people not pay attention to it? To go into your theory, what do you actually mean when you say Bitcoin solves for human behavior?
Cool. So I think that if we use the 7 deadly sins as a starting point, religious texts, and specifically this was Christian, came up with these 7 behaviors that are seen as sinful in nature, the 7 deadly sins, and those sins being pride, envy, wrath, sloth, greed, gluttony, and lust. And when you go through each one of those, you can get a sense that they are negative in nature, in that if you're a glutton, you're consuming more than you actually need. If you're greedy, you're probably taking more than you need from someone that needs it more than you. If you're lustful, you're going to go after anything and everything that might be attractive. Sloth, your aversion to doing work. Like that. How does that make sense in our modern world? Envy, always being envious of others rather than chasing after what will make you satisfied. Pride is, I think, some would argue, is the root of all of those other sins. But ultimately, pride is that exact example of that researcher, 20 years in their field, not having too much pride to admit that they are wrong. These are the types of behaviors that, when they manifest, often act in our long-term worst interests rather than best interests. But the interesting thing about these behaviors is you can almost link them back to our evolved behaviors, as in there was a point in time in our evolution when we were hunter-gatherers and things were scarce, that these behaviors were important. You had to be gluttonous. You didn't know when your next meal was going to come. And therefore, you had to be greedy, because if you shared it with everybody, you may not have enough to last till the next feed. Lust, absolutely, because you're procreating, you need to spread your genetic material. And so you will go after any female if you're a male in that instance. Envy, if someone else has power, you will want that power because that will have better long-term survival for yourself. So you're going to be envious of it. Sloth, you do not want to expend more energy than you otherwise have to, because energy is scarce. Food may not come. And so you don't want to be running around if you don't want to run around. If you don't need to run around, sorry. And so sloth is a conservation tactic. And that's loose, and I'm yet to properly link all of that via research to justify it. But I think just listening to that and me going through that, what I'm hoping you're getting is there's a lot of logic behind those evolved behaviors. And when those behaviors start to get applied into monetary systems, now let's see where all of those would manifest. I think you can see greed in the system, people taking more than they actually need from others. And we see that with the wealthy being able to game the system through inflation to effectively extract value from the working class up to the privileged class, if you will, because money gets printed into the hands of people that consume goods. They pay more for those goods because it's been inflated, and that money eventually finds itself to the owners of those businesses who continue to grow their wealth. Whereas we've fleetingly, as those on the consumer end, gotten rid of that inflated money to consume in order to survive. So greed and gluttony, you're seeing gluttony with just how much money is being printed and being overconsumed beyond its need. Sloth, no one wants to do work anymore. we're starting to see people wanting handouts left, right, and center. Most, especially in the West, there seems to be an aversion to doing hard work or going through pain. We are all envious. We all want to be super rich. We're never content with what we've got. And so you start to see how, from the people that control the system to the people that are consumers in that system, these behaviors lead us to the worst possible behaviors and lead to our own demise. And so that's where this theory around Bitcoin solves for human behavior comes in, because when you look at Bitcoin, it starts to put the handbrakes on all of that. It's not centralized, and so therefore the privileged class, I'll call it in this case, business leaders that are influencing government officials that set the rules, the reserve banking infrastructure that sets monetary inflation rates and targets and does QE, easing or tightening in order to control the economic systems, they lose their power to be greedy and gluttonous and exert their influence across others. Bitcoin also then starts to control our own aversion to doing the work. So that element of sloth, in the fact that you've got a whole bunch of miners consistently working in order to protect the network, that in itself is expending effort in order to protect the system and maintain it. That aversion to doing work is pretty much gone, because in the fiat system, go into my computer, type, oh look, $1 trillion printed. In Bitcoin, you are having to put in an exceptional amount of effort and work in order to mine the next block to get that bit of Bitcoin that comes as a block reward, and obviously all the fees. And so that work hurdle, that aversion to sloth, is the very thing that protects the system itself. And so I've written a few articles on this as well on my Substack, which I haven't written on for quite a few months, but maybe we can put in the show notes there. I've got an article that talks to how each of these behaviors, each of these sort of sins are addressed by Bitcoin itself.
This is super interesting. It's almost, and I've seen so many positive changes with how when you adopt Bitcoin, you change some behaviors. So it's and with solving for human behavior, it's almost like Bitcoin solves human behavior without the for in there. And of course, like there are still people with what might be seen as a deadly sin, as something bad maybe in Bitcoin. So it's not like solving everything. I'm kind of against the thing of Bitcoin is here, like everything is perfect. But there is this overall thing where when you have Bitcoin in your life, all of a sudden the positive perspective on life is kind of getting a higher signal, getting magnified, and the negative thing is kind of getting smaller. So because you have found the deepest thing, you found the foundation for your life, which is kind of fixed now. You kind of have something that you can rely on. And I think that can make a lot of interesting things. It's interesting how you frame it with like solving for human behavior. I do like that. It's kind of yeah.
And I think the distinction is it's solving for human behavior in money. It'll never. And I was thinking about, if I were listening to this and I'm hearing something solving my behavior, like that seems a bit authoritarian, isn't it? Like you're solving for me. Like what the hell? Isn't that anti-Bitcoin? But what I'm saying is, it's limiting those behaviors to distort and otherwise to distort the system to the detriment of the many. And it's not solving for it, because you've still got it. We've all got it. Like, I'm going to be greedy at times, whether I like it or not. I'm going to be gluttonous at times. I'm going to eat extra cake whenever I want, and I know I don't need to. Or, you know what, I'm going to spend a bit more money than I actually need to on something just because I can. Hopefully I can do that more often with Bitcoin appreciating at the rate that it is. And so those behaviors are there, but it's controlling to a degree It's our individual influences on the system itself, and therefore our effect on others. Innately, we still got it, but at least we're now not doing it to the detriment of everyone else around us who is also using that system.
So it's less about Bitcoin influencing human nature and more about creating rules that work with it perfectly aligned.
Correct. It doesn't even give you the opportunity to express those behaviors in the first place. You can't print a Bitcoin. So you cannot use sloth, that aversion to work. You have to do the work to get it. And so where we would have otherwise printed the money, we no longer can. And if we all agree to those rules of the system that are enforced via code, we can't express that even if we wanted to.
I do love the watches from Coin Vigilante, but today I have a very special message, not from me, but from the CEO himself, Carlos from Coin Vigilante. Let's hear him.
To all the Robin Seyr podcast community, I'm Carlos Estrada from Coin Vigilante, and we're sponsors of the show, and we're going to give you a very special discount exclusive to you, 10% off your order at coinvigilante.com when you use Robin at checkout. We have really nice watches that you guys can buy right now for 10%. This is a transparency edition, beautiful watch. These watches are worn in over 55 countries and counting. This discount is just for you, exclusive to the Robin Seyr podcast. We have limited editions. We have limited productions. These watches come in very nice packaging, boxing material, and they are collector's item for Bitcoiners only. Enjoy the discount. Thanks for supporting the show and Coin Vigilante.
The most important thing for your Bitcoin journey is not buying Bitcoin, but it's how to keep them. And yes, you have maybe the right tools, but how do you actually go ahead and stick it all together so it's the most secure for you personally? Self-custody is a deeply personalized journey, and the Bitcoin way is helping you exactly finding that correct setup for you personally. They are also helping you with securing your own cybersecurity. And if you want to go one step above all that, you can even get a consultation for a Plan B residency. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Robin and you will get a 30-minute free consultation. I finally and officially mine Bitcoin. This is not just something to stack more Satoshis, but it's most importantly also to support the network. Individual miners are the ones that keep the Bitcoin network decentralized. And by the way, you get KYC free Bitcoin. That's why I use simplemining. I get an actual proper Bitcoin miner. They set it up for me. They repair it if it breaks down. And most importantly, they let me choose the pool and even connect my own full node. I'm completely sovereign and I'm completely in control, and I can sign up with Ocean, no account needed. I just give them a Bitcoin address and then there's mining going on. No KYC, nothing. So if you're ready to mine Bitcoin, go to simplemining.io, tell them you come from Robin, and let's mine Bitcoin together. I want to tell you about something very special to me. It's called Microseed. If you hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you should, you know how critical it is to secure your seed phrase. You should not have them on paper. You should not have them on anything else than titanium. With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. And we have right now a summer sale going on for 15% off. So you get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today for $186, and you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. Again, that's microseed.io to get your last backup tool you ever need. I think this explains very well what you mean with the theory and what's kind of the main thesis around it is. And maybe maybe we can go just briefly. I mean, obviously we can't we can't cover the whole book, the book that isn't even there yet in one podcast. But maybe we can go briefly now in the first part that I think you called framing, something like that. And this is kind of what I got from this is the perspective with which you look on Bitcoin.
Bitcoin and all the research that I'll be doing across the history of money, evolutionary biology, and religion. This will be the perspective that I largely take in order to surface insight from the literature that has otherwise been missed. And I went through so many iterations on this because I started off and I said, I'm trying to solve for human behavior. It's evolutionary biology. Maybe let's see whether or not I can just say that my framing is an evolutionary biology lens on the collapse of monetary systems over time. And I started there. And you type that into AI, and actually, just as we go into it, I use AI for a lot of my research, because gaining access to these databases is one of the most expensive things. It's a huge hurdle for any independent researcher because it costs tens of thousands of dollars per year to access these repositories. With AI tools coming in, it's now opened the door, and it's costing me, I think, about $1,000 a year, which I've paid in order to do this. But there are two ones that I use. One's called Consensus, and one's called SciSpace, and they both have access to research articles across these databases and apply a large language model in order for you to query these. And so what used to take months to do what's called a systematic literature review now takes minutes. And when I say minutes, it literally, within 5 minutes, it's executed the search across tens of thousands of papers, selected the top 150 papers, categorize all those 150 papers for what point it's trying to make, and then layers it up to justifying the question or getting you insight to the question that you were posing. And so the reason why I'm able to do this research now of all times and why I'm going all in is because these AI tools is like the perfect research assistant that is going to save me effectively over 18 months worth of research effort. And I'm going to do it in about 6 months part-time. So that's how I'm doing this in order to get to the outcome. But first is, like we see in ChatGPT or any AI tool, it's the quality of the question that you ask that yields the result that you get. You ask AI a question that's lacking detail, that's lacking specifics, you're not going to get the answer that you need. You're probably going to get something very high level and generic. And when I first tried this evolutionary biology lens into the history of money, fell flat in my face. 3 papers talked to it. And so I was like, okay, I've not found the perspective, the framework to structure my question to this AI tool to search this database of research papers to get to my outcome. And so I was like, now I need to really do the work. And I was going back and forth on different approaches. I started with, and I've actually got it here, which is sort of my research notes, which was, you know what? Let's start with Austrian versus Keynesian economics, because in a way, the difference between these two schools of thought is the very foundation for the difference between Bitcoin and the fiat system. Fiat is very Keynesian in its perspective of interventionalism. Austrian is very Bitcoin centric in its belief on the individual and individual property rights and decision making. So it's like, let's start there. And so I started thinking about individualism and collectivism. Fell flat in my face. It wasn't picking up anything in there. Then I thought, okay, why don't we focus in on the individual? Because everything that we've been talking about has always been about aggregated groups of people, like the broad economy, government intervention. But we lost sight of the individual making economic decisions in their purchasing of goods, etc. So, okay, let's start at the individual. Maybe there's something there. So I looked at individual and cognitive biases as a potential segment, social and herd dynamics as a segment, and then obviously with evolutionary underpinnings, and that fell flat on my face. So I was sort of going in this doom loop of, I've got no idea how to structure this. I kept on going around in circles, and 3 weeks ago, I landed on how to think about this. So I came back to Austrian economics, and I said, okay, I can't do these broad, very complex, very abstract ideas. Let's break it down and make it even more simple. And so I'll pose you the question and let's see whether you get there. If I were to say that there are three personas in an economy from an Austrian lens, what do you think those three actors in the economy are?
That's an interesting question. I mean, my initial thought is immediately buyer and seller without thinking too much about it. I don't know if that's the direction.
Two of them.
I've nailed two of them. Okay.
So I would call it the consumer and the producer. The buyer, the seller, I would say consumer, producer. Someone, you and I, consuming goods, the producer, businesses, individuals that are creating goods and services and are selling it to the consumer. So yes, buy and sell. So I'll give you that. So producer and consumer, and there's one other.
I mean, the market. Producer and the consumer is kind of the end result of the market.
Okay, so I called it the rule maker or government. So governments are there to set the rules and ensure that the rules are followed. It's actually in the title, government. They're there to govern over the society of consumers and producers. And so at this very basic level, you've got three actors in the economy in this basic view. And when you run that basically through AI tools to say, if I were to use the consumer, the producer, and the rule maker or government as a primary lens to look at economic activity, would that be accurate? And every single one came back as, yes, that's a very good foundation to start from, because it brings it back down to its most simple actors or personas. And I'm like, okay, now I'm getting somewhere. So now you've got these three dimensions of three people. Under each one of them, you can now layer in, well, how did the consumer's behavior affect monetary collapse? How did the producer or business behavior affect monetary collapse? How did the government's behavior affect monetary collapse? And I can do that 7 deadly sins: pride, envy, wrath, sloth, greed, gluttony, and lust. And so now I've got the perspective, because now I can run searches, and it's come back with hundreds of results now. And so now I've got a good academic base to base all my research off for the collapse of money through time. And I'm looking at ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, ancient China. So this is all BC era monies. Then we look at Rome, we look at the Weimar Republic, and maybe one other. And I'll do 6 case studies of these three actors in the economy and how they manifested the 7 deadly sins. So that's part of the framework. The next question I said, well, this is very pessimistic, isn't it? I'm just looking at why things collapse in the worst of us. But where there is a negative behavior, you've got your positive counterpart. And instead of thinking as the 7 deadly sins as the be-all and end-all, I said, well, they're probably not one or the other or binary. They're probably somewhere in between extreme pride and its opposite. And so now I'm looking at it as a scale. And the opposite to pride is humility. The opposite of envy is gratitude. Opposite to wrath is cooperation. Opposite of sloth is work or diligence. Opposite of greed is generosity. Gluttony is moderation. Lust is temperance. And so now I can say, through every single monetary collapse, for each one of these actors, where on this scale were each of them? Were consumers more prideful, more gluttonous, more greedy, and maybe not as lustful? Were the political class or the rule makers, etc.? And so now I've got an ability to categorize these behaviors across these three people on a scale for each one of these collapses. And then the final piece was, I was still missing something. And what I was missing was base human emotion, happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, disgust. And because this is very behavioral in nature, the seven deadly sins are actions. They're the end product of it. But what catalyzes these to either go faster or slower are the emotions that we're feeling at the time in which we're about to take our action. And so you also then have to figure out how happy is the population, how sad, were they fearful, were they angry, because that will catalyze the seven deadly sins. And so now I've got this 3-tier approach or framework. Layer 1, the actors. Layer 2, the behaviors. And layer 3, the emotions. And by doing this 3-tier framing, I'm now able to take a different lens into literature about monetary collapse in a way that's not been done before. And the reason why I can now say that it's not been done before, which was very interesting, was when you run these queries through these AI tools, the conclusion it draws is there is a significant gap in the literature because barely anyone has looked at these systems through this lens. And one of the conclusions that I draw from this, and to the point that you said earlier around that professor who's always done it from his way, as a Keynesian in his approach, they just don't get it. It triggered the light bulb for me, which is because it's always been done like that. And the literature is overwhelmingly, I'll call it Keynesian focused and not from the individual up. Because of the scarcity of literature, prospective PhD candidates who eventually become professors don't have anything to draw on. And so they build on those that come before them. There was a saying when I was doing my PhD, which was, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And that was well accepted. And so you're standing on the shoulders of giants, and those giants are Keynesian. They're not Austrian. Austrians have not done, there are examples, so I'm not going to discount it, but nowhere near as much as Keynesian. And so our history has been told from a Keynesian perspective. Our history has been told from an aggregation rather than from the individual. And so the reason why this part of the research becomes so important, why this framing is so important, is because I'll be retelling history from the lens of the individual rather than the economy, the geography, the political, the cultural. These are all aggregations and too broad. I'm going to simplify it down to the individual. And so, and that's the aha piece, which was, that's probably why we're in the position that we're in academia and in the way that everyone thinks. It's because no one's actually told our history from this perspective.
I love that. I love that you've broke it down through 3 personas, and then you can look at the scale. And I don't know if I understand it correct, but then we can look at the history of money, and we can look at specific time frames and see which persona was on which spectrum of a deadly sin, on what side, kind of, on how much, like how prideful someone was, or how sloppy someone was. That's an interesting perspective. Like, I personally never heard about it, but that gives this whole thing, like, it makes it more tied to humans and the human nature, which I think is always a good idea, because humans are very, very involved in those things. And it also shows kind of what led to things, and maybe even has a predictive nature in there if we have certain actors hitting certain spectrums. I don't know if you also cover that.
Yeah. So what I'm hoping to see is, when I do this across the 6 or 7 different monies through history, that I see the pattern emerge. I'm not going to assume the pattern's there. I'm just going to let the literature tell me what it's telling me from this perspective. What I'm hoping I see is, hey, consumers traditionally will show these behaviors as a result of these emotions. And producers traditionally in these collapses will show these behaviors with these emotions. Now you've got a different way to predict how things in the future will occur, because all you'll now have to say is, how are people feeling? What are the type of behaviors they're expressing? And if it is this profile, then history would say we're about to hit collapse.
One thing, how will you make, like, how do you measure how prideful or lustful an actor is? Like, is there, have you went into certain characters or like properties of that?
So not yet. And so the problem that I'll have on doing this scale, and so I've got an idealistic state, which is I'll do this scale rather than a binary, they were either lustful or they weren't, is I need to now dive into a couple of articles, and I haven't quite gotten there yet. I was hoping to, but didn't quite get there before this conversation, where through reading the articles in full, I'll be able to get a sense as to whether that's even possible. The problem will always be is academia will look at that and say, you're full of crap because you can't do a scale. You've got no empirical measures that says, hey, you're 50% here or you're 30% there. And so I know that that's going to be my biggest hurdle on using the scale. So while the goal is to use the scale, there's a good chance that I'll have to default to either it was observed or it wasn't. And it'll be a binary, yes, it was envy and lust, or yes, it was greed and gluttony, or yes, it was wrath. But I won't know to a degree. But we'll see where it goes.
Could it be that in a Bitcoin market that the third actor is more just rules? Like we have this popular meme in Bitcoin, rules, not rulers. And this is the first thing that popped up in my head when you said like rule makers, of like, what does this look like if we have a full Bitcoin economy? I mean, there's a lot of open questions how a full Bitcoin economy works. If there's governments, there's still fiat currencies and all of those things. But how do you look at the potential of those rule makers maybe being replaced in the future by just rules and the free market?
It's the protocol. The rule maker here is the protocol. It is the Bitcoin code. It's already been determined, and changes to the protocol or to the rules can only be done via consensus across the Bitcoin network. In the same way that you would put a BIP up in order to make hard forks, hard changes to the protocol or soft changes, and the great work that the Bitcoin core devs do for the entire community. Like, that's how you make change, but it requires consensus. That's the rule maker as it relates to money. But to the point of government, you will always need government. To some way, shape, or form, it hopefully is less and less, because ultimately we are a physical world and money is just a tool. I think when you come to this space, you initially think, man, Bitcoin's going to solve everything. You solve the money, you solve all problems, or you solve the world, or you save the money, you save the world, or pick your analogy or your quote. The reality is money is just a tool. And so how it relates to engineering, for air travel, for my energy that I use to heat my home, and the light bulbs that are powering us right now, and the internet that we're using in order to talk over from Austria to Australia, right? It's not going to be governed completely by code. There's going to need to be a government of some sort to do that. Our borders, our defense, it's largely someone has to look at that. And so there'll still be a need for government, but I think it'll be more limited. And you won't see what we have now in a lot of Western democracies, which is agency sprawl, where you've got like 200 plus agencies of the government trying to control every little aspect of our community. What you'll see is what Milei did in Argentina with his afuera, and start ripping off departments after departments where they're not needed anymore, and you'll shrink it considerably.
Man, that's super interesting. And I already feel like we need a second part. That's like, we've just covered the first part of of where we want to go in there.
And then I'll give you one more, and I'm not too sure how much time we've got, but I'll quickly give you one more, which is the piece that has struck me as well, and I'm now questioning myself on it, is trust. Because in the Bitcoin community, there are probably two things that we say to each other consistently. Not your keys, not your coins. Ultimately rooted in, you can't trust anyone, you have to own it yourself. Or the other one is, don't trust, verify. Now, all true. Problem is, history would say that if we are too binary on this idea of trust, I think it'll lead to significant long-term detriment to us. It's not one or the other. Trust, if you look through history, has been a foundation for our success as a species. We have had to have trust. When you're a small community, you have to trust others to help out, because not one person can't do everything alone. Like if I'm out in the wilderness myself, I have to build shelter, I have to hunt, I have to potentially look after myself medically, I have to gather. Like, that's way too much things for one person to do. Whereas if you can trust for a community to do it, you suddenly will thrive. And we are still biological creatures in nature. This idea of don't trust, verify, and whatnot, I think is important. But where I think we do take it to an extreme of saying you should never trust. And we're now starting to see that debate unfold in and amongst treasury companies that are challenging the not your keys, not your coins. You're starting to see service providers pop up that are layer 2s over Bitcoin, where you are having to trust them to provide you a service to some degree. And then people say, no, you should just use the Lightning Network and be self-custodial. And we're starting to see the emergence of this debate of trust come through. And when I look at it from this behavioral standpoint and this evolutionary standpoint of our civilization, trust has been fundamental. And so it was sort of this like epiphany moment of maybe we've gone through to one extreme in a similar way that we've been ping-ponging between the extreme left and the extreme right. The problem with this is we may think it's a pendulum swinging from one side to another. In reality, it's a wrecking ball that destroys all progress that's been made by going from left to right. And in actual fact, we should be somewhere in the middle. And so this idea of trust is going to be, I think, featured in the book in some way, shape, or form, because I think it is so critical, and we just need to rethink our perspective on that as Bitcoiners and be a bit more temper our distrust with an element of trust where it makes sense, because I think that there are unforeseen consequences into the future by going down this path too distrustfully.
I love that, because I do think if we take not trusting anything and then having this ultimate freedom thing to an extreme, we do end up in the woods where we have to do everything ourselves. Because the moment you go to the supermarket and pick up the groceries where you cook your meals yourself, you trust the supermarket to not poison your food. The moment you step in the car, you trust that the car manufacturer did not put a bomb in there that just blows up in the middle of the street. You did not verify that. You did not, every time you go out of on your house in the garage and you look in the car, you don't look underneath it, between it, and rip all the parts off just to see, hey, is there no bomb in there today? So we do trust a lot of things every single day. I do trust that like my camera works. Like I do trust that the chair that I'm sitting on is like every day we're trusting a lot of things. And then it's like, okay, with money, I do trust, even if I have self-custody, people trust their hardware wallets. I mean, yes, you can do metal backups, and I highly recommend that. You can do multi-signature, so you can like have, and I also highly recommend that.
I highly
those
recommend
things,
that as well.
and all those things to eliminate trust. but somewhere in the line, there's always some sort of trust involved. Probably Bitcoin in self-custody is the most elegant solution for a trustless system of money. And that's why then people say, oh, don't trust, verify, and we take it to everything else. But I think there's a great value in having trusted institutions, in having trust between people, and having some sort of trust that I can sleep at night well knowingly that nobody will break into my home and kill me. Like I'm fairly certain of that. I cannot be fully sure, but I trust in the system that the Austrian government has in place, the police has in place, and all the things that we have worked through hundreds and thousands of years that come up to this point. And physical danger, I don't know. I only follow Austrian statistics in that because I'm in Austria. They have gone down significantly. The crime rate went up in the cyberspace a lot, but in the physical space, crime rate just goes down a lot. So this is just a short tangent saying trusting someone else, even if this is an institution, isn't the bad thing inherently. You have to see if it's a good or bad thing. I wouldn't trust all my financial energy in one bank. Like I wouldn't trust that, even though I probably can in Austria if I'm not doing something very wrong with the government. But I wouldn't trust that just because I don't. But trusting that the supermarket doesn't poison me, probably a good thing for my mental health.
Yeah. But I think the other point, the other side of this coin is, when you are bullish on Bitcoin and you say these words, don't trust, verify, trust is what's got us here, you can't trust government, you can't trust the RBA or the Reserve Banking infrastructure, it's the Reserve Bank of Australia here. When you are a non-Bitcoiner, part of the legacy systems, you hear that is incredibly polarizing because it doesn't bring the nuance of, well, we understand why you have trust, but where you don't need to, why should you? And sometimes even the nuance in the way that you say it might be the difference between someone jumping onto Bitcoin because it isn't as polarizing as what they once heard versus the really polarizing, don't trust, anarcho-capitalist type approach, which is going to turn off a whole bunch of people. And so to the point of how do you orange pill, part of it is that temperance of realizing where other people are at, soften the language to a degree, bring balance and nuance. And I think it's that nuance piece which is missing because we are all short, sharp headlines rather than longer form discussion a lot of the time.
I have a very interesting view on that. I don't know if it's interesting, but I find it interesting. Polarizing statements, aggressive statements, big statements, bold things, like however you want to call it, those bring attention, but actually don't sell. So, yes. And you can shout on Twitter with some don't trust, verify, some big statement, and you might get like 1 million impressions and you might get a lot of attention for that. But I would question how many people actually get Bitcoin just from that. So you need the polarizing statement, the bold statement to bring attention to Bitcoin, but then you need very kind and loving and very empathy-driven people to actually explain to no-coiners Bitcoin. And I think the even the word no-coiners seems like a very demeaning one, like a very like I understood Bitcoin and you are on this down level and I will now explain you how money works. And I mean, that's what Bitcoiners usually do. But we shouldn't come from because we all have been there. Like we all didn't understand Bitcoin and we've all, like I thought Bitcoin is a scam and I wanted to prove why Bitcoin is a scam. And that's how I actually got into Bitcoin. So it's a very natural thing to do, I think. And
I think in what you've just said, you've effectively proven why I am barely on social media these days. I don't really log on to Twitter. I maybe check it once a week. I'm not on Facebook, Instagram. I go LinkedIn purely from the professional standpoint, purely because of that, because it is so inflammatory. It is so polarizing, one or the other. And I now just listen to podcasts that are at least an hour long, where it aligns to what I'm trying to learn or understand in the world to get nuance. And because I'm no longer on the socials, it's the person-to-person physical interaction or long-form conversation is the only way that I will either consume, and I think that Bitcoiners will orange pill people in this sort of next wave, because the polarizing thing of money, dollar go up or like price go up, it's an alluring start, but because all the mainstream only does that and Twitter is only the polarizing piece, it doesn't get to the depth that actually convinces anybody to actually do it. And so the in-person confidant, someone that you trust, that in 20 minutes might be able to give you the nuanced answer or the nuanced perspective of why Bitcoin, that'll be the reason why you orange pill someone, not necessarily because you're inflammatory or polarizing on Twitter on a single post, chasing the likes or the impressions. It'll be the 20-minute conversation with someone at the cafe that will make you far more successful as a grassroots approach.
And I haven't. I think we need. I think we actually need both. I have this example with Donald Trump because I think he's just such a polarizing example, and I think most people get it. When from a marketing standpoint, and someone that lives on social media and on podcasting platforms, I study a lot what works and what doesn't work. Like that's literally all I do every day. Like I study like why did a single episode perform good and why did a single episode doesn't perform good? Why did a tweet go good and why did a tweet didn't go good? And when I look at Donald Trump, he has both actually. He has very bold statements. He has done in his election very short and bold statements. He puts names like Sleepy Joe in there that are just like rememberable, that you would never think Barack Obama would have done that. Like that would have been so out of place, but he can do that. And with that, he creates attention. Like all the mainstream media from the right to the left all talk about him. But then he did something extremely smart. He went on all the long form podcasts that he could find in this last cycle. Like he went with Adam Ross, he went with Joe Rogan, with like with Theo One, like with every single podcaster that has a huge audience. He went on there and he sat down with them for hours, hours. And that's something that, oh gosh, I forgot her name. What was this, the other candidate?
Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris completely overlooked. She also went on podcasts, but they were like super short. They were like 40 minutes, 50 minutes long, and not that many. And I think also Joe Rogan, I don't know like who to trust, Kamala Harris or Joe Rogan, but like they seem to be not agreeing on like how long an episode and how not controlled it should be. And so I think when we go back to Bitcoin marketing, it's that bold message of like, oh, Bitcoin will rule the world and like we will go to like $100 million. But then also this nuanced conversations where you can go dive deep and have like your Sailor series on Robert Breedlove, where you can dive deep 15 hours between two people just talking about Bitcoin. So both are extremely important. And I think the more we do on the deep conversations and long conversations, the better. But we shouldn't forget on the value of attention bringing, especially in this new world of Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram.
And to that, Donald Trump is a personality, and so that attention piece works quite well. I'd say for someone like yourself that's built the audience because of all the work, you built the following from you, it would make sense. From I'm talking about I call it the new era podcasters like Abram, it would make a lot of sense. But for someone like myself, like I don't really care for social media per se. That's not going to work for me to just go onto Twitter and my contribution being fiat scam, you're all going to zero. no one's going to care because I'm just like a nobody. If you've got the brand, the polarizing is great to draw attention to it, and then you go down. But for, I'll call it the 99% of the rest of us, and I being in that 99%, I'd say that the polarizing isn't probably advancing the cause because the attention's already being generated from the likes of yourselves, a Michael Saylor, a Lynn Alden, a Natalie Brunell, a Danny Knowles, a Checkmate. They're the ones that can do the polarizing stuff because they built the brand and they've got the attention, and so that they can do it. And then maybe people that are famous in other areas where they've got brand recognition. But for me, I know that does nothing.
And I love that. And this is actually something, and I will make a small prediction. Let's see how it goes in 5 years. But you will have, if you go through with the book, and it's as interesting as it sounds for the 1 hour that we're talking, like almost 1.5 hours that we're talking now. I do think you will have a big brand recognition because I do think the same way as interesting speakers build big brands is they have interesting thoughts and people want to listen to them. And this is the single most important metric that I look at in determining if an episode went good or not, is how long did people watch it? And not like in total, because then the views come in and the clickbait come in, but just on average. People that clicked on an episode, how long on average did he listen in one session this episode? Not even the aggregate, but like in this one session. Because this is not a perfect indicator, but this is the best indicator we have to determine was this actually interesting for someone. And if I remember correctly, the first episode was extremely good in that for you, and it will be, I think, probably even better here. And once you have the book out and you can go in even deeper and more interesting analogies, people will love that. And I really see when I see people, they come with big things and bold things in there, they usually get more views. But then I look at the metrics and I'm like, oh, people didn't watch that long. People didn't stick around that long because it was not that interesting. He just put out a lot of bold statements. Then I go with someone like you that doesn't put bold statements out, but just does deep research. People love that shit. Like people love listening to interesting things. And this is kind of just to make a prediction here. I think your brand will be extremely powerful and good in 2, 3, 4 years because because you don't do this fancy stuff on social media. And you probably won't get elected for US president with that tactic, but you should.
Nor would I want to. No, thanks. I do appreciate that. But what I will say is I hope that at that point I don't succumb to trying to get the views and I stick to what got me there, which was thoughtful, not polarizing per se, but just speaking like a normal human being, even if it is on Twitter and I'm a bit more present there, because I'm hoping at that point I am financially free. There isn't the allure of I need to build this into a business because I need money through the door and therefore I need the attention in order to drive the clicks. Hopefully it's hey, I've got the fuck you money, so I don't need to do any of that. I'm just going to do this. And so I'm hoping that doesn't happen for a while so I can actually build that cash in the background to give me that ammunition to not succumb to, and I actually saw this in that 3 months that I was doing my own podcast in the Bitcoin space. I was constantly looking at how to get my views up. I need to turn this in, I need to get this into revenue. And like the stress of getting the money was to make this a full-time thing was extreme. Realizing now, no, I need the FU money first before I go into it because I know I don't want to compromise.
This is very smart because if you're not, I mean, I myself still look at views and all those things, but I really try to just let the thing out and let it be whatever it is. Like in the beginning, I was like, my heart rate went up at 2 p.m. my time because this is where my episode goes out. And I still to this day, even though it goes out automatically and I don't have to do anything for it, at 2 p.m. I'm looking at my phone. Like no matter if I'm out on a boat Like I was 2 weeks ago with my girlfriend and with some cousins to have fun. At 2 p.m., I knew it was 2 p.m. I looked at my phone and it was like 2 p.m. in 4 minutes. Because it's so freaking trained in, like, this is the time where the podcast goes live. Like, I think maybe that's what I needed to get it started and get it started so quickly. But it's not healthy. It's very far away from healthy.
I'll say that because of the volume that you put out, I think you've got more creative license to take that approach. Whereas if you're doing that one episode a week or one episode every, like on a much more infrequent basis, then you're forced to go down there. So your format is quite interesting in that you've probably got that creative control to have a guest like myself that goes deep on certain stuff that may not get as many views, but may get longer views versus the ones that will have more brand recognition or the statements that get greater views that also drive then the clicks and therefore all the other things that fuel this podcast as a business for you.
Very
so
true.
You might hit the nail on something there.
Yeah, it gives me more creative outlet. But man, we have covered from I think 6 parts. What it was the first one correctly?
Yeah. Hypothesis, framing, history of money, evolutionary psychology, religious wisdom, the Bitcoin solution, and the Bitcoin curve.
Then I have one more question, like my end routine question that every one of my returning guests get, and then the end routine question for the previous guest. But first, the question that every returning guest gets: what have you learned outside of Bitcoin since your last appearance?
Well, I had a child, so I've learned quite a bit on how to keep a human alive. But putting that one aside, what have I learned over the last 12 months? The big one that I've learned is on the pursuit of something that you truly love, you will never really want to pursue money. And I've seen this in my professional career because I still work full time outside of all of this. And my desire to climb the corporate ladder has just gone out the window. Like even as of 12 months ago, I still wanted to make sure that I was, advancing my career, getting the right experience, getting for the promotion. Now, the thing that I've learned now is now that I've found that true passion, the desire for that is just gone. Absolutely gone. And I'm just happy to earn my salary to be able to focus the time on the things that I truly love to do because I've now found it. And so to anyone listening to this it may take a bit of time. I'm in my mid 30s, and so maybe I got there earlier, but that was a big one for me.
I love that. But I'm really curious on what you think, what you say on the end routine, where the previous guest we have an end routine for the few people that don't know, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asked you the question: if you had the chance to meet Satoshi, but could only ask him one question, what would it be?
Oh, damn. Well, it's kind of topical because I'm taking this unique angle on Bitcoin itself. And so for the founder of it, I would be asking, were you solving for money or were you solving for humanity?
It would be a fascinating answer. I would love to hear him getting asked that.
and I was thinking for a while there because I was like, everyone's going to assume that I'm going to ask that because it's literally the subject of my research. Can I be a bit more creative? But I thought, no. That would have to be one of the more creative questions for him.
I mean, it does make sense, yeah. I would not know what to ask, honestly. The task itself to choose one question, like it overwhelmed me when I got Microseed on and I was like, okay, I probably only ask him like 5 questions because I have only 1.5 hours. So, what should I ask him? And this already overwhelmed me, and it's just Microseed, comparing him to Satoshi Nakamoto and having him for 1.5 hours. But like having only one question with Satoshi Nakamoto, the founder one, oh fuck. I would think about that too long.
If you pontificate about that, make sure you read the book, the Genesis book by Aaron Van Weerdum. He does the history of the cypherpunk movement from the late 70s, early 80s through to now, and you start to see all the building blocks that Satoshi used to build Bitcoin. And so if you're ever posed with that question for whatever reason, read that book so you don't ask a question for which there's already an answer for.
Amazing. Man, I loved it so much. It was a great pleasure talking with you. And just as a promise for all the listeners, we will get to the other parts. We will get deeper in Arv's book, maybe half a year, maybe somewhere along, like later this year, maybe early next year, somewhere along those lines. And I'm already looking forward to part 3 of our conversations together. And thank you so much for doing the deep research. You are doing Satoshi's work. And before I let you go, where can people find you? And once it's out, because maybe someone listens to this podcast when it's already a year later, where can people find you in the book?
Yeah, cool. So you can find me on Twitter. I might start going a bit more active on that. It's at ArvsNotes, ARVSNOTES. And I'm thinking about, and maybe I should do it, I'll launch a Patreon for the book. I'll make it as cheap as possible. But for those that are truly interested on the journey, I'll probably do monthly live Q&As where I provide insight on the research for the month that has been. You get first view on all the unique insights, ask questions, debate with me. Maybe that could be kind of cool. So I'll probably launch that Patreon in the next sort of 24, 48 hours, seeing on how this episode goes. So it'll be those two, and the Patreon will be the Bitcoin curve as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being on. It was a true pleasure. And also thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye-bye. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.